The wind that day did not just blow through Bitter Creek. It tore through the town like it wanted to wipe it off the map. And Clara Vance wondered if her life was about to be torn away just as easily. Dust spun through the empty street outside the small church as Clara stood near the altar, her hands trembling in a borrowed gray dress that did not quite fit. She kept her eyes on the wooden floor, counting knots in the planks to keep herself from running out the door. She was only 19, alone in a land too big and too harsh for someone with no family and no money. Her parents were buried back in Ohio, and the aunt she had traveled west to meet had died before Clara arrived. There was nowhere else to go. So she was here, about to marry a man she barely knew. The church door opened, and a gust of cold wind followed Silas Thorne inside. The whispers in the pews grew louder. Everyone knew this was not a love match. It was survival. Silas needed a wife to run his ranch. Clara needed a roof over her head. Silas walked down the aisle with slow, heavy steps. He was tall, broad, and scarred, a man shaped by hard work and harder years. Dust covered his coat, and his face looked more suited to a battlefield than a wedding. Clara did not dare look up, but she felt his presence beside her like a wall. The preacher spoke quickly. No poetry, no joy, just words that tied two strangers together. Silas said, "I do," in a low voice. Then everyone stared at Clara. If she walked away now, she would have nothing. No home, no food, no protection. Out here, that meant death. "I do," she whispered. At the ring Silas slid onto her finger felt heavy, almost like a chain. There was no kiss, just a nod, and suddenly she belonged to him. Outside, his wagon waited. The wind tugged at her skirts as Silas helped her up. His hand was rough, and she flinched without meaning to. He noticed and loosened his grip at once, helping her with careful distance. They rode away from town in silence. Bitter Creek disappeared behind them, replaced by endless open land. Clara had never seen such emptiness. No fences, no neighbors, only miles of yellow grass and distant mountains. It made her feel small and exposed. Silas focused on the horses. He spoke only once. "About 2 hours yet." She nodded, too nervous to answer. By nightfall, they reached the Thorne Ranch. The house stood alone in a shallow valley, weathered and plain. No flowers, no paint, yet just a place built to survive wind and winter. Inside, the house was clean, but lonely. One table, 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the stove. No curtains, no signs of warmth. Clara felt like a stranger stepping into someone else's life. Silas washed up and set stew on the table. They ate in silence, every sound painfully loud. Clara forced herself to swallow, even though her stomach twisted with fear. After supper, Silas lifted the lamp. "Bedroom's through here." Her legs felt weak as she followed him. The room held a large iron bed and little else. Silas set down the lamp and spoke quietly. "I'll turn my back so you can get ready." He faced the wall. Clara fumbled with her dress, her heart pounding. She slipped into bed, pulling the quilt tight under her chin. "I'm ready," she whispered. Silas lay down beside her after blowing out the lamp. The mattress dipped under his weight. For a long moment, he did nothing. Then his large hand rested gently on her shoulder, and the past came rushing back. The smell of whiskey, rough hands, being trapped with no escape. A man on the wagon train who had cornered her near the creek weeks before. His grip, his breath, the terror of being powerless. Clara's body reacted before her mind could. She curled away, shaking. "It hurts," she gasped, though he had barely touched her. Tears burned down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. Maybe tonight. I can't." Silas froze. He could have forced her. The law would have sided with him. No one in town would blame him. But after a long silence, he pulled back. The bed shifted as he moved away. "Sleep," he said quietly. He lay on top of the quilt, fully clothed, leaving a wide space between them. Clara cried herself to sleep while the wind battered the house. Silas stayed awake, staring into the dark, feeling lonelier than he had in years. The next morning, he was gone before she woke. Coffee waited on the stove, and a short note said he'd be back by noon. Clara cleaned the house, trying to make herself useful. But outside, trouble was already growing. A ranch hand passing by saw the untouched bed and carried the story into town. By afternoon, everyone in Bitter Creek knew. The new bride would not let her husband touch her. Women whispered she was unnatural. Men said Silas had been cheated. Some claimed she must be ruined already. Clara knew none of this as she struggled through her new life. Each day began before sunrise. She learned to cook on the stubborn stove, haul water from the well, and scrub laundry until her hands cracked and bled. The wind fought her at every turn, stealing sheets from the clothesline and covering everything in dust. Still, she tried to make the place feel like a home. She stitched curtains from feed sacks. She mended Silas's shirts. She planted a small garden near the kitchen door, fighting the hard soil until green shoots appeared. Silas noticed. He did not say much, but sometimes his eyes softened when he saw her work. Their nights, however, remained tense. He tried to be gentle, moving slowly, but each time fear locked her body tight. "It hurts," she whispered again and again. Silas rolled away each time, frustration heavy in the silence, but he never forced her. 2 weeks later, they rode into town for supplies. Clara entered the store alone while Silas visited the blacksmith. The women inside watched her with thin smiles. "I heard the sheets stay neat," one whispered loudly. "A man like Silas Thorne deserves better." "Maybe the girl isn't pure," another murmured. Heat flooded Clara's face. She fled the store, trembling, humiliation burning in her chest. On the ride home, desperation pushed her to speak. "I need to see the doctor." "Maybe," she thought. If something was wrong with her body, it could be fixed. The doctor's examination was cold and quick. His verdict was worse. "There's nothing wrong with you," he said. "Just nerves. Tell your husband to stop treating you like glass and get on with it." Silas read the doctor's note outside. His face turned hard. Without a word, he struck a match and burned the paper in his hand. "I don't take orders about my wife," he said. That evening, Clara finally broke down, confessing her fear of being used, of disappearing into nothing. Silas listened, then spoke quietly. "I married a wife, not property. You're safe here." And for the first time, Clara believed him just a little. That night, instead of turning away, they lay side by side and simply held hands while the wind howled outside, and something fragile and hopeful began to grow between them. Spring came hard to Wyoming, bringing heat instead of relief. The grass dried before it could grow, and the creek near the Thorne Ranch shrank into a slow, muddy stream. Ranchers in Bitter Creek spoke in worried voices about water and failing herds. Some families packed their wagons and left. But Silas Thorne could not leave. The ranch was everything he had. But Clara worked beside him now. Her hands, once soft, were rough from hauling water, scrubbing clothes, and tending the small garden she fought to grow near the house. They spoke more these days, small things at first: coffee, chickens, weather. But slowly, trust built between them. At night, they lay side by side. Sometimes their hands touched. Sometimes Clara even rested her head against his chest. Yet when things moved further, the fear still rose inside her like a storm. "I want to be a real wife," she whispered one night, tears slipping down her face. "But my body won't listen." Silas swallowed his frustration. "We'll get there," he said. "No hurry." But outside their quiet struggle, trouble was growing. In town, Hiram Sterling, the richest man in Bitter Creek, sat in his bank office studying old papers. He owned the largest ranch nearby and wanted the Thorn Ranch water rights. The land Silas lived on carried an old debt, and buried deep in the contract was a clause saying the ranch could return to the bank if Silas died without an heir, and rumor said his marriage was not real. Sterling smiled thinly. He knew exactly how to use that. 2 days later, winter struck again without warning. A late storm rolled down from the mountains, turning rain into blinding snow and hail. Cattle panicked. Horses screamed. Silas rode hard, trying to drive the herd toward shelter. But Clara watched from the house, heart pounding, until she saw a calf stumble away from the others toward the creek. Without thinking, she ran outside into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her over. Ice stung her face as she tried to shove the terrified calf toward the barn. Then the herd stampeded. Huge bodies burst through the snow straight toward her. Clara froze, sure she would die. Suddenly, Silas slammed into her, knocking her into the mud and dragging her beneath the fence as cattle thundered past. When it was over, he hauled her to her feet, shaking with fear and anger. "What were you thinking?" he shouted. "You could have been killed." "I saw the calf," she stammered. "Damn the calf," he roared, then stopped. His face changed as he pulled her into his arms. "I thought I lost you." That night, wrapped in blankets by the fire, Clara realized something new. Silas valued her life more than his cattle, more than his ranch. Later, in bed, she tried again to be close to him. She wanted to give back what he had risked for her. But when his weight shifted over her, panic seized her again. "It hurts!" she cried. Silas pulled away instantly, disappointment heavy in the room. Clara sobbed. "You should send me away," she whispered. "Find someone better." Silas lifted her chin firmly. "I chose you, not just a wife. You." But the pressure inside him finally cracked later that week. After Clara forced herself to try again in desperation, terror overwhelmed her once more. Silas, frustrated and helpless, slammed his fist into the wall. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Clara curled away in terror, certain he would strike her next. Silas stared at his bleeding knuckles, horror washing over him. Without a word, he fled into the night. For days after, they barely spoke. He slept in the barn. Silence filled the house, and while they struggled, Sterling made his move. A sheriff arrived with legal papers. Sterling and church elders claimed the marriage was invalid. Without a true marriage or heir, the ranch could be seized. Clara felt the truth hit her cold and sharp. They were using her fear to steal Silas's home. Before they could prepare, disaster struck again. One night, Clara woke to screaming horses. Flames lit the sky. The barn was burning. Silas ran straight into the smoke to free the animals, while Clara hauled water, stamping sparks away from the house. The heat scorched her face as timber collapsed in a shower of sparks. When the fire finally died, Silas spotted a rider fleeing in the darkness, one of Sterling's men. He grabbed his rifle and aimed. Rage flooded him. Months of pressure, fear, and humiliation burned inside him. He was ready to pull the trigger. "Silas!" Clara stood beside him, soot streaked across her face. Her hand rested on his arm. "If you shoot, you lose everything," she said quietly. "That's what they want." Silas trembled, then slowly lowered the rifle. The next evening, the entire town packed into the church. Sterling sat calm beside a lawyer who questioned Silas openly. "Has this marriage been consummated?" the lawyer demanded. "Or is this woman merely pretending to be his wife?" Silas's anger rose, but before he could answer, Clara stood. Shock rippled through the church. "My husband has not bedded me," she said, voice shaking. "Yeah, because I asked him not to." Gasps filled the room. She stepped forward, hands trembling but voice growing stronger. "I was hurt before I came here. I was afraid. And instead of forcing me, this man waited. He protected me. He gave me time." She looked around at the crowd. "You call me broken, but fear is not sin, and patience is not fraud. We are building something real. That belongs to us, not to you." Silence filled the church. Then Sheriff Miller stood, announcing evidence of arson tied to Sterling's ranch hands. Murmurs spread. The mood shifted. At last, the preacher cleared his throat. "The council finds no grounds to end this marriage. The matter is closed." Sterling left in cold silence. Outside in the sunlight, Clara nearly collapsed with relief. Silas caught her, pride shining in his eyes. "Oh, you were braver than anyone in that room," he whispered. But as they rode home, both knew Sterling was not the kind of man to forgive humiliation easily. And danger on the frontier never truly ended. Summer came down hard on the Wyoming plains, but the Thorn Ranch did not break. The burned barn had to be rebuilt before winter, and every day from sunrise to sunset, Silas and Clara worked side by side. Silas cut timber in the hills while Clara stripped bark and mixed mud for the walls. Sweat soaked their clothes and dust clung to their skin, but they worked in quiet understanding. When Clara struggled with a heavy beam, Silas stepped in without a word, lifting with her instead of pushing her aside. They moved like partners now, not strangers forced together. The town noticed the change too. A word of Clara's speech in the church had spread. The gossip softened. People who once whispered now nodded politely when she passed. One afternoon in town, the blacksmith's wife handed Clara a small packet of flower seeds. "Too many for my garden," the woman said. "Thought maybe you'd like them." Clara held the packet, surprised. It felt like acceptance. Back home, the evenings became peaceful. After supper, they sat on the porch while the heat faded and the sky turned purple behind the mountains. Sometimes they talked about small things, sometimes about deeper ones. Silas spoke of the war and the loneliness that followed. Clara spoke of her childhood, of never feeling wanted. Piece by piece, they learned each other's hurts. And slowly, the fear inside Clara began to loosen. One warm August night, after a long day moving cattle, Clara stood in the bedroom wearing her nightgown. The lamp still burned on the small crate beside the bed. Silas stepped inside, fresh from washing, and moved to put out the light. "Leave it," Clara said softly. He stopped and turned toward her, surprise in his eyes. "I want to see you," she said, "and I want you to see me." Her heart pounded, but something inside her felt different now. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. "I want to try again tonight," she whispered. Silas searched her face. "We can wait," he said gently. "There's no hurry." "I'm ready," Clara said, "but we go slow, and if I say stop, we stop." "The moment you want," he answered. She stepped closer and placed his hands on her waist. His touch was warm and careful, waiting for her to pull away if she needed. But she did not. But when he kissed her, it was slow and questioning, not taking, asking. Clara focused on the smell of soap on his skin, the steady beat of his heart, the man who had slept on the floor rather than frighten her. When fear flickered, she looked into his eyes and saw patience instead of hunger. This time, when they lay together, it was not terror. It was trust. There was pain, brief and sharp, and Clara cried out. But Silas held her through it, whispering softly, reminding her she was safe. And then the pain faded, replaced by warmth and closeness she had never known. Afterward, Clara cried again, but the tears were different now. Relief. Freedom. Silas wrapped the quilt around them, holding her close while the lamp burned low. Outside, the wind moved across the plains, but it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a song. Life did not suddenly become easy. The West never allowed that. A prized horse later broke its leg, and Silas had to put the animal down. Clara sat beside him that evening without speaking, simply holding his hand, while the grief passed. Storms threatened their hay, and they fought wind and rain together to save the crop. Hiram Sterling still owned the bank, and sometimes his riders passed along the distant fence line, watching. But after the church hearing and the failed attempt to drive Silas away, Sterling kept his distance. He knew the town now stood with the Thorn Ranch. Autumn arrived, bringing cooler air and golden light. One evening, Clara sat sewing by the fire while Silas worked over his books. The room smelled of coffee and wood smoke. "What are you making?" Silas asked without looking up. Clara smiled quietly and held up the small white shirt in her hands. Silas blinked. The garment was tiny. He set his pen down slowly. "Clara?" She rested a hand on her stomach. "I think we might need a cradle." Silas crossed the room in 2 steps and knelt before her, his large hand trembling as it rested gently against her belly. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice breaking. "I'm not certain yet," Clara said softly. "But I feel different." Silas lowered his head into her lap, shoulders shaking as silent tears fell. For years he believed his family name would end with him. Clara stroked his hair. "We'll be good parents. We'll be gentle," Silas promised. "No child of mine will ever feel unwanted." October brought heavy rain that soaked the dry land at last. One evening after the storm passed, Silas and Clara stood together on the porch. The air smelled clean, and the sky slowly cleared above them. Stars appeared, bright and endless. Silas wrapped his arms around Clara from behind, his hands resting over the slight curve of her stomach. "It'll be a cold winter," Clara said. "Let it come," Silas answered. "We've got wood, and we've got each other." Clara turned in his arms and looked at him, and the scars and lines on his face no longer frightened her. They were part of the man who had become her safe place. "I love you, Silas," she whispered. A slow smile spread across his face. "I love you too. More than this land, more than anything." They stood together, watching the last clouds drift away, the wind whispering softly through the dark. The land was still wild and hard. Wolves still howled in the distance. Winter would come and storms would test them again. But inside the small house in the valley, something strong had taken root. Not fear, not survival. Love. And this time, it was enough.